Alright, in this video we're going to do a watercolor demonstration using salt or rubbing alcohol. And so I'm going to start out by putting a wash of watercolor down. And I'm going to start with a pretty intense color, but also a pretty fluid paint here. And I'm using your basic Crayolas. One of the things I want you to do is to use 2 or more colors when you do this. And so for this first side of the sky, I'm going to go ahead and do blue and violet, more of a sunny average day. And I'm going to make sure again that I have plenty of water down. In fact, one of the things you probably should do is a wet into wet technique where you get your paper wet first and then we'll apply a little bit of the colors down. So I'm going to go ahead, and I keep adding water as I'm going because I wanted to have plenty of fluid on this as I go. So putting it down, putting a little more color in this. I want a little more purple for vibrancy here. So I'm going to put some blue down and a little bit of purple down. Okay, so we got a pretty decent amount of paint and definitely some water in there. And so while it's still wet, you got to work kind of quick here, but while it's still wet, I'm going to take a little bit of salt and I'm just going to sprinkle it in. And what's happening is the salt is absorbing the water, which also has paint in it, and gives us kind of this fun speckly look. Now, what you want to do once you have completed the watercolor and then the salt is let it dry like this. If I wipe it off right now, I lose that whole fun speckly look. So I'm going to let it dry like that, and then after it dries, you can take your hand and rub off all the salt, and it'll give it a speckled look. For the second part of this, I'm going to do same thing, starting out by a wet into wet. And so I'll get my paper moist. And then I'm going to add some blue. This time I'm going to do blue and black, a little more of a stormy look here. So I'm going to start with blue. Again, fairly intense. Add a little more water there because I want it to be a pretty intense, bright, vibrant color, but we're going to dull it down with some black now. Again, just to give it more of a cloudy, stormy look. And this time, instead of adding salt, I'm going to add some rubbing alcohol. So I'm going to take a Q-tip and I'm going to dip it in some rubbing alcohol, and then I'm just going to put it down, and that actually disperses the watercolor. So I just barely touch it and get a little more small. You can see it spreads, even though I just barely touch it, it spreads quite a bit. So this one spread a whole lot more than the one that I just barely touched. And so every once in a while I'm going to dip my Q-tip back in and just barely touch the paper. I could even do some of these where they kind of overlap a little bit. And this might be something that gives you the look of snow or stars, maybe kind of a futuristic or science fiction look, but it's definitely fun too. And again, this one is also needs to dry on its own before you do anything. So those are the 2 techniques we are looking at today. All right, I'm going to add on to this video with the idea that we've practiced and now we've decided which technique we're going to use, and we're going to apply it to our city. Well, this city isn't done. It does not have windows on it, but it's far enough along that I can go ahead and do the sky anyway. Now, the biggest thing you want to remember is that your paper has to be wet. Your paint has to be wet. So as we begin this technique, I am going to concentrate on one area at a time, because if I try and do the entire thing, it's going to dry over here before I get done with this. So I'm going to go ahead, and I'm also using a decent sized brush, and I'm going to go ahead and apply my water, again using that wet into wet technique, and I'm going to work rather quickly here. This is one of those where you almost want to stand up as you're painting, so you're moving and you're getting this done fast. So if I have enough water, I might be able to get over here, but I certainly don't want to dawdle. I don't want to take too much time. I want my paint to stay liquid. So, got my paper wet. I'm going to dip my paintbrush in the water. I'm going to collect my paint colors that I need, and I'm going to let it move around. And again, I've got quite a bit of paint here because that's what I need to get these effects. So I'm going to keep adding a little more and a little more. Normally, your watercolor should not go into your buildings if you did not paint over your buildings, so keep that in mind also. You want to work fast, but you also want to be neat here. You know, what I mean by that is take a look at your buildings, make sure that you are going along the edge and you don't have a halo effect here. And you also don't have a ton of streaks. So I'm going to go ahead and do this, and then I'm going to use that rubbing alcohol approach. And once I get the desired amount of rubbing alcohol splotches, I'm going to go ahead and move on to a different part of this. So again, as you begin your city, you want to make sure you're doing a portion of it at a time. Don't try and do the entire thing at once.